Paul takes the sacred imagery of temple worship and literally transposes it directly into the concrete realities of your daily social interaction. Your commitment to everyday relationships fueled by love and the Spirit is your truest act of worship. So here's our visual roadmap for the explainer today. We're going to hit 1. The root of ethics. 2. Living in the tension. 3. The renewed mind. 4. The law of Christ. And 5. Building up the community. To help us decode all this, we're relying on the rigorous academic work of theologian James D.G. Dunn. His landmark book, Jesus and the Spirit, is essentially our scholarly anchor here. He's the one who did the heavy lifting, distilling these incredibly dense biblical texts into the cohesive 5-pillar ethical paradigm shift that we're going to unpack today. All right, moving into section 1, the root of ethics, the indicative and the imperative. So the crucial point is that in his mind, ethics are fundamentally anchored in theology, meaning ethics is never an attempt to earn salvation. There's this theologian, Oscar Cullmann, who Dunn actually cites, and he captures this perfectly. He says, the imperative is firmly anchored in the indicative. Basically, all the ought-tos in life rest entirely on the what is. Let's look a little closer at how that actually functions. Think of it kind of like this. The indicative on the left, that's the theological reality. It's the root of what God has already done through Christ. It's the new creation. Then, the imperative on the right is what a believer ought to do in response. It's the path we walk. Paul talks about walking in newness of life. So doing the right thing, the imperative, is simply the necessary, natural response to the new creation God has already achieved. You don't act good to become a new creation. You act good because you already are one. Okay, section 2, living in the tension, eschatological realism. Now, you might be wondering, if we're this new creation, why is doing the right thing still such a massive struggle? Well, Dunn points out that believers live in an ongoing reality check. Scholars actually call this eschatological realism. We're basically caught between the already of salvation and the not yet of a world that's still heavily subject to sin and human frailty. You belong to the age to come, but you're still walking around in the present age. And that requires a principled realism. It means acknowledging that daily tension and recognizing that right living demands this constant, moment-by-moment reliance on the Spirit to overcome our human weaknesses, which Paul calls the flesh. Up next, section 3, the renewed mind, internalized Spirit-led discernment. This is where the operating system gets its biggest internal upgrade. We're literally shifting from an outside map to an inside compass. The old way relied on outward compliance with an external rulebook, right? Laws written on stone. The Greek word for this is gramma. But Paul introduces internal responsiveness, a Spirit-enabled sensitivity. The goal of doing God's will is exactly the same, but the means of achieving it completely changes. It's no longer about looking at a static code. It's about an inner motivation fueled by a renewed mind. To really grasp this, we have to look at a super rich Greek term Paul uses, dokimadzein. This is the core of Paul's ethics of Spirit-led discernment. It translates to a charismatic recognition of God's will. Now, just to be super clear, Paul is not creating some law-free free-for-all here. He's absolutely not saying just do whatever feels right. He's describing an incredibly sensitive, moment-by-moment attunement to determine what really matters in complex, ever-changing daily realities. I absolutely love how Oscar Cullmann puts this. He says the ultimate goal of this renewed mind, this dokumazine, is the capacity of forming the correct ethical judgment at each given moment. Think about how powerful that is. Instead of a rigid list of rules that might not even apply to your specific modern dilemma, you're empowered with a spiritual instinct, a real-time wisdom to test and approve the right course of action right when you need it most. All right, section 4, the law of Christ, faith and love. But wait. If we aren't using an external rulebook, what exactly is our standard for behavior? Let's see how this builds across 3 steps. Step 1, Paul didn't destroy the old law. He actually wanted to fulfill its original intent. Step 2 is what Paul calls the law of faith. Faith is the primary human response to divine grace. It's this creaturely trust in God that life-giving power flows right through. Right living isn't about outward works or self-powered striving. It's an obedience of faith, total reliance on God's enabling. And that culminates in step 3, the law of Christ, which is defined entirely by love. And this brings us to the norm of love, or agape. For Paul, Christ himself serves as both the ultimate model and the law for our ethics. love becomes the primary hermeneutic, basically the supreme filter for absolutely all behavior. Paul teaches that the whole law is fulfilled in one single command, to love your neighbor as yourself. And this isn't just some abstract, warm feeling. It's explicitly defined by Jesus' own teaching and his concrete example of self-sacrificial service to others. If your action doesn't pass through the filter of self-sacrificial love, well, it doesn't fit the operating system.
Which brings us to Section 5, Building Up the Community, Communal Interdependence.
So this entire ethical framework isn't just about you and your isolated individual spirituality. It is fiercely outward-facing. Meet our final Greek term for the day, oikodome. It roughly translates to communal upbuilding. Pauline ethics are corporate, not individualistic. He says believers are members of one another, therefore oikodome is the primary metric for any moral action. The ultimate test of your individual liberty isn't just, hey, am I allowed to do this? It's, does doing this actually build up the community? Individual freedom is always, always subordinate to the welfare and upbuilding of others. Now, what's really fascinating here is how Dunn explains Paul's radical redefinition of worship. Paul takes the sacred imagery of temple worship and literally transposes it directly into the concrete realities of your daily social interactions. He is secularizing the cult. He establishes a priesthood of all believers, but the altar, it's no longer inside a physical temple building. The altar is now the marketplace. The altar is your home. Your commitment to everyday relationships fueled by love and the Spirit is your truest act of worship.